Have you ever wondered what happens when a heartless man abandons his family in their darkest hour, only to return 9 years later, demanding a cut of the empire built from the ashes he left behind? My husband called our newborn son a burden. But 9 years later, he was on his knees begging. Karma does not always happen naturally. Sometimes, it is a ruthlessly calculated trap. Keep listening to witness what absolute destruction really looks like. Welcome back to Violet Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep running. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our dedicated staff to afford their living expenses and continue bringing you the content you love. You can help by scanning the QR code on the screen or clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. My name is Piper Lopez. I was 26 years old, and my world was supposed to be perfect. Instead, the air in the recovery room of the Houston, Texas hospital felt thick, heavy, and overwhelmingly sterile. The bright fluorescent lights above my bed hummed with a low, irritating buzz that drilled directly into my exhausted brain. I was trapped beneath stiff white hospital sheets, the lower half of my body still entirely numb from a terrifying and highly dangerous emergency cesarean section. Every shallow breath I managed to take sent a sharp, agonizing stab through my stitched abdomen, a cruel and constant reminder of the sheer physical trauma my body had just endured to bring my son into the world. His name was Mateo. He was just a few hours old, tiny, vulnerable, and fighting his own silent battles in the neonatal intensive care unit down the long, echoing hall. But there was no joyful celebration waiting for us. There were no balloons or flowers. The doctors had delivered the crushing news just after he took his first struggling breaths. Mateo was born with severe congenital hearing loss. The pediatric audiologist stood at the foot of my bed with a grim expression, explaining in a soft voice that my beautiful baby boy would need highly expensive cochlear implants and years of intensive medical intervention and speech therapy just to have a chance at hearing my voice or speaking his own name. My heart shattered into a million pieces for him. I laid there, hooked up to a dripping IV bag, desperately needing the comforting embrace of my husband. I needed him to hold my hand and tell me we would get through this tragedy together. The heavy wooden door finally creaked open, and Julian walked in. He did not rush to my side. He did not kiss my sweaty forehead or even ask how our newborn son was doing. His footsteps were sharp, deliberate, and calculated against the polished linoleum floor. His face was a mask of cold, unfeeling stone. He stopped right at the foot of my bed, reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket, and tossed a thick stack of papers directly onto my lap. They landed with a heavy thud against my bruised stomach. I recognized the legal formatting immediately. They were divorce papers. I stared at him, my mind completely unable to process the magnitude of the betrayal. He looked down at me, his eyes entirely devoid of any warmth or basic human empathy. "You and this defective child are nothing but a heavy burden dragging my career down," he said, his voice as sharp as broken glass. "I am not spending the rest of my life paying for a broken kid." He did not even flinch as I gasped for air, the medical monitor beside my bed picking up the erratic spike in my heart rate. Instead, he simply adjusted his expensive designer tie and casually informed me that he was leaving immediately. He had already booked a one-way first-class ticket to San Francisco. He was moving to Silicon Valley to launch a new cryptocurrency startup, and he was not going alone. He proudly admitted he was leaving with his new girlfriend, a 22-year-old tech influencer who, in his words, actually understood his massive vision. He spoke about her with a sick, twisted sense of pride, as if she were a shiny new trophy, and I was just an anchor he had finally managed to cut loose. My chest heaved as blind panic set in, but the true nightmare had not even fully revealed itself yet. After he turned his back, I frantically reached for my phone on the bedside table to check our joint bank account. I needed to know how I would even begin to pay for this hospital stay and the surgeries our son needed. My blood ran completely cold. The balance was zero. My mind raced in sheer terror. I quickly checked my personal savings. Zero. In the weeks leading up to my grueling labor, while I was heavily pregnant and vulnerable, Julian had systematically and secretly drained everything. He took $60,000 of our hard-earned savings, but his greed did not stop there. He had also forged my signature and completely cashed out the life insurance policy I had just inherited from my late mother. He stole every single penny to fund his fraudulent crypto vanity project with his young mistress. He had abandoned me in an empty, freezing hospital room with absolutely nothing. My bank accounts were completely wiped out. An avalanche of terrifying medical bills was already piling up by the hour, and a special needs newborn was crying in an incubator, depending solely on me for his very survival. Julian turned on his heel and walked out the door without looking back, leaving me to suffocate under the crushing weight of his extreme cruelty. The physical pain of the brutal surgery was nothing compared to the violent shredding of my soul, but as I laid there, staring at the blank, white wall, something deep inside of me violently shifted. The initial shock evaporated, and the suffocating despair burned away into something entirely different. It turned into a cold, dark, and highly focused rage. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a luxury for the weak, and I could no longer afford to be weak. As the heart monitor beeped a steady rhythmic cadence beside me, I made a silent, unbreakable vow to the empty room. I was going to survive this hell, and I was going to make him pay for every ounce of suffering he had just caused. I packed whatever I had left into 2 cheap suitcases, bundled my fragile infant son tightly against my chest, and fled to the dusty, unforgiving outskirts of Austin, Texas. Houston had nothing left for me but echoing ghosts and a suffocating mountain of medical debt. I rented a cramped, run-down apartment on the second floor of a decaying building. It had peeling yellow wallpaper and a leaky bathroom faucet that dripped like a relentless, maddening metronome, constantly counting down the precious seconds until my next utility bill was due. The brutal Texas heat baked the thin, uninsulated walls of our tiny living space, but turning on the air conditioning was a luxury I simply could not afford. My entire existence instantly transformed into a fierce, bloody war for basic survival. The ticking clock in my head never stopped ringing. The pediatric specialists had been incredibly clear. Mateo needed his complex cochlear implant surgery before he turned 12 months old to maximize his crucial chances of normal speech and cognitive development. The estimated cost for the devices, the surgery, and the aggressive speech therapy was nearly $100,000. It was an impossible, towering mountain of money that I had to climb completely barehanded. I took a grueling, low-paying remote job doing Tier 1 IT technical support. I exclusively worked the graveyard shift so I could dedicate every waking hour of the daylight to caring for Mateo. While the rest of the world slept peacefully in comfortable beds, I sat bathed in the harsh, stinging blue glow of my dual monitors, walking frustrated, angry strangers through password resets and basic network configurations at 3 o'clock in the morning. I lived entirely on cheap, bitter instant coffee and pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I was barely functioning on maybe 3 hours of severely fragmented sleep a day. My eyes were permanently bloodshot, and my hands trembled from physical exhaustion. But it was during those intensely isolated, dead hours of the long night that my brain began to fundamentally rewire itself. While waiting for sluggish diagnostic tests to finish running on client computers, I started aggressively digging into the complex architecture of decentralized networks. I needed to understand exactly how Julian had moved my stolen inheritance. I plunged deep into the chaotic labyrinth of blockchain ledgers, anonymous exchanges, and encrypted transactions. What initially started as a desperate, grief-fueled search for my own lost funds quickly morphed into a profound and shocking realization. I discovered that I possessed a rare, instinctual gift for seeing the invisible digital threads connecting hidden financial wallets. Where other people just saw an impenetrable wall of random alphanumeric characters, I saw clear, glowing footprints left behind by arrogant financial predators. I knew I needed a partner who completely understood the intricate legal side of the money trail. I picked up my phone and called Chloe. She was my fiercest, most loyal friend from our college days, and had since grown into a razor-sharp, highly sought-after forensic accountant. "I can track the digital shadows," I told her over the phone, my voice raspy and hollow from sheer exhaustion. "But I need you to translate my data into undeniable legal proof. We can hunt these thieves." Chloe did not hesitate for a single second. We immediately formed a quiet, highly efficient underground partnership. We started small, taking on freelance gigs from desperate retail investors who had lost $5,000 or $10,000 to fly-by-night crypto scams and phantom investment pools. I would spend my midnight hours violently tearing through layers of sophisticated digital camouflage, finding the exact offshore server where the stolen funds were parked. Then, Chloe would step in and draft the ironclad, terrifying legal demands that forced the exchanges to freeze the assets. We were successfully recovering stolen money, and with every single extraction, a generous cut went directly into a locked savings account. Mateo's medical fund was finally growing. I flatly refused to let the suffocating trauma of my brutal abandonment drag me under the water. Every single time I felt the creeping, icy darkness of despair threatening to consume my mind, I violently channeled that raw, bitter hatred into absolute, hyper-focused productivity. I stopped hunting the hackers manually. I started coding my own weapons, night after night, fueled entirely by a righteous, burning fury. I wrote and compiled a proprietary core algorithm from scratch. I meticulously designed it to automatically strip away the false identities, the tumbling protocols, and the proxy servers used by the most elite financial hackers. It was an elegant, incredibly aggressive piece of software. It was a digital bloodhound that never slept, never ate, and never missed a cent. Because of that code, we hit our financial target. Mateo finally got his expensive surgery. The morning the audiologist activated his internal implants was the exact moment my shattered heart began to truly beat again. We sat together in the quiet, sterile clinic room. The doctor pressed a small button on her tablet. Mateo blinked hard, his tiny, fragile shoulders jumping as he was startled by the sudden, overwhelming influx of sound. He slowly turned his head, his wide eyes locking directly onto mine, just as I softly whispered his name. His face instantly broke into a wide, magnificent, tear-jerking smile. Several months later, after hours of grueling therapy, he babbled his very first, clear word. It was the most beautiful, melodic sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Mateo was not just surviving, he was thriving. He became the single, brilliant beacon of light that firmly anchored me to my humanity, preventing me from turning into a complete monster every time he laughed. It reminded me exactly why I was building this powerful digital arsenal in the dark. I was not just surviving the ashes anymore, I was preparing to build an empire on top of them. The massive turning point arrived on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. A highly prominent regional bank in Texas was suddenly paralyzed by a catastrophic ransomware attack. A sophisticated syndicate of international hackers had successfully breached their internal networks, locking down their entire server infrastructure. The attackers threatened to permanently wipe out the financial records, mortgages, and life savings of millions of innocent customers unless a massive, 8-figure ransom was paid immediately in untraceable cryptocurrency. The bank executives were in a state of absolute sweating panic. Chloe caught wind of the escalating crisis through her extensive forensic accounting networks. She immediately arranged an emergency video conference with the board of directors. We pitched them my proprietary tracking algorithm. Utter desperation makes wealthy corporate executives highly agreeable. They bypassed their own massive security protocols and gave me a secure backdoor access point to their compromised systems. I sat in my dark home office, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. Within exactly 4 hours, my software brutally bypassed the hackers' advanced encryption protocols, isolated their primary command server, and forcibly reclaimed complete control of the bank's digital assets. I tracked their illicit routing and recovered tens of millions of dollars before the morning stock market even had a chance to open. The executives were completely stunned. They offered me a massive blank check right then and there, but I politely declined. I demanded a long-term, highly lucrative corporate contract instead. That single, incredibly high-profile victory was the powerful launchpad I needed. I officially founded Aegis Core Solutions. We did not just build standard firewalls or offer basic network support. We specialized in aggressive, preemptive cybersecurity and elite financial data intelligence. Our reputation spread like wildfire through the corporate underbelly of the country. Within a few short years, Aegis evolved from a two-woman operation in a dusty apartment into an unstoppable, towering corporate juggernaut. We quickly became the absolute go-to strategic partners for massive global conglomerates, multinational hedge funds, and private wealth institutions that desperately needed to protect their digital vaults from the world's most dangerous predators. I traded my oversized, coffee-stained sweaters for sharp, impeccably tailored designer suits. I commanded massive glass boardrooms filled with powerful men who hung on to my every single word. 9 years passed in the blink of an eye. I had successfully transformed from a terrified, abandoned young mother into a highly respected, self-made multimillionaire. My net worth skyrocketed into the stratosphere. I completely left the cramped, leaky apartment behind forever. I purchased a sprawling, heavily fortified estate in one of the most exclusive, high-security neighborhoods in the entire state. Our home was a modern fortress of absolute peace. We had biometric security gates, a team of private guards, and acres of pristine, beautifully landscaped land where we could finally breathe easy. Matteo was now 9 years old, and he was the absolute, undisputed center of my universe. Thanks to the aggressive early medical intervention and years of dedicated therapy, he communicated flawlessly. He was a vibrant, deeply intelligent, and wonderfully happy little boy with a bright, infectious laugh. He also inherited my deeply obsessive, analytical brain. Instead of playing standard video games on the weekends, he spent his free time eagerly learning advanced programming languages. He would sit beside me in my home office, proudly typing away on his own custom-built computer, constantly asking me to review his clean lines of code. Watching him thrive, watching his brilliant mind expand without limitations, was my ultimate, undeniable victory over the darkness of my past. But I had learned a brutal, permanent lesson in that freezing hospital recovery room all those years ago. The people you trust the most can completely gut you without a single second of hesitation. I flatly refused to ever leave myself or my son financially vulnerable to anyone ever again. I needed absolute, unbreakable armor. So, I hired Marcus. He was a ruthless, brilliant, and incredibly expensive veteran corporate lawyer who understood the dark, complex arts of asset protection better than anyone on Wall Street. Together, Marcus and I engineered a flawless, impenetrable financial fortress. We established a complex, deeply layered network of international shell companies. The actual ownership of Aegis Core Solutions was systematically buried beneath dozens of anonymous holding corporations spanning across multiple strict legal jurisdictions. At the very top of this confusing, dizzying labyrinth was an ironclad, irrevocable blind trust. The singular, untouchable beneficiary of that massive wealth trust was Matteo. I structured everything so precisely that, on paper, I personally owned absolutely nothing. Officially, according to the government and the public record, Piper Lopez was just a salaried chief executive officer managing the company. My personal bank accounts held only my standard executive paycheck, which was heavily taxed and entirely normal. If anyone ever tried to sue me, extort me, or demand a piece of my massive wealth, they would hit a solid titanium wall. There was zero equity to steal because the true ownership belonged to phantom entities that could not be legally touched by any individual or family court. I had built a massive, invisible empire, and I sat firmly on the hidden throne, quietly controlling every single piece on the board, completely untouchable. The pristine silence of my executive office was shattered by the sharp, flashing light of my private intercom. It was my head of corporate security calling from the ground floor. He informed me that a man was standing in the lobby, aggressively demanding a face-to-face meeting with me, claiming to be an old family member. I pulled up the high-definition security feed on my secondary monitor, and the blood in my veins instantly turned to ice. Standing there, angrily arguing with the polished reception staff, was Julian. He looked entirely different from the arrogant, well-groomed man who had abandoned me in that hospital room. His posture was slumped, his hair was thinning, and he was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit that looked like it had not been pressed in months. His face was deeply lined with the unmistakable exhaustion of a man who had completely failed at life. Word on the financial street was that his flashy Silicon Valley startup had spectacularly collapsed. The 22-year-old influencer he had left me for had apparently drained his remaining stolen funds, packed her designer bags, and vanished into thin air the moment the cryptocurrency market crashed. Now, he was entirely bankrupt, desperate, and standing inside my building. I told security to send him up. I wanted to see the sheer audacity of this man up close. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open, and Julian stepped into the massive, sunlit room. He took in the panoramic views of the city skyline, the expensive modern art on the walls, and the massive mahogany desk I sat behind. A brief flash of intense, bitter envy crossed his tired eyes, before he quickly forced it down and replaced it with a pathetic, manufactured look of deep sorrow. He walked forward, completely uninvited, and sank into one of the Italian leather chairs opposite my desk. He let out a long, heavy sigh, placing his hands on his knees as if he were carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. "Piper, you look absolutely incredible," he started, his voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet, artificial sincerity. "I know I am the absolute last person you want to see right now, but I have spent years trapped in my own personal hell, drowning in regret. I was so young back then. The immense psychological pressure of discovering our son had special needs completely broke my mind. I panicked. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I have hated myself every single day since." He paused, desperately trying to force a single tear to fall from his dry eyes. "I just want a chance to make things right. I want to be a father to Matteo. I want to help you raise him." I sat perfectly still, my face completely devoid of any emotion. I did not blink. I did not shift in my chair. I just stared directly into his soul, watching him squirm under the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. He was lying through his teeth, playing a poorly rehearsed character. "Save your breath, Julian," I finally said, my voice completely flat and echoing loudly in the spacious room. "You do not care about Matteo. You did not even know if he survived the surgeries. So let us drop this pathetic, insulting theater right now. Tell me exactly why you dragged yourself into my building." Julian stared at me for a long, tense moment. Slowly, the fake sorrow completely melted right off his face. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched tightly, and the familiar, cold arrogance I remembered from the hospital room instantly returned. He reached into his battered leather briefcase, pulled out a recently published copy of Forbes magazine, and slammed it down hard onto my immaculate desk. My face was printed clearly on the glossy cover, accompanied by an extensive feature article detailing my massive success as a self-made tech tycoon. "You have been sitting on an absolute gold mine," he spat, his voice dropping an octave, practically vibrating with raw malice. "You built this massive empire, and you did not think I deserved to know I am the one who pushed you to be independent. If I had not left you to fend for yourself, you would still be a nobody working in a cubicle. You actually owe your entire success to me. State your business and get out of my office," I commanded, my tone razor-sharp. He leaned forward, placing his sweaty palms flat on my desk, revealing his true, venomous intentions. "I have already spoken to a lawyer. Piper, I am Matteo's biological father, and my name is still on his original birth certificate. I have legal rights. If you do not give me exactly what I want, I will walk straight into family court and file a massive lawsuit demanding joint custody. And while those legal proceedings drag on, I will personally go to every major news outlet and tabloid in this state. I will tell the press exactly how the great, powerful CEO of Aegis Core Solutions is actually a cold-blooded, vicious billionaire who uses her massive wealth to illegally banish a loving, reformed father from seeing his disabled son. Your pristine corporate reputation will be dragged through the mud. Your conservative banking clients will drop you in a heartbeat when the public relations nightmare begins. My stomach twisted with pure, violent disgust. But I kept my facial muscles perfectly locked. He was entirely shameless, willing to use the son he called a burden as a disposable pawn to extort me. "What exactly are your demands?" I asked quietly, feigning a hint of defeat in my voice. A sickening, triumphant grin spread across his face. He leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms, fully believing he had completely cornered me. "I want an official, contracted position on your executive advisory board. It will be a remote, silent role, but it will come with a guaranteed, non-negotiable salary of $50,000 a month. On top of that, I want exactly 10% equity in Aegis Core Solutions, transferred directly to my name. You give me the money and the shares, and I will happily sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement and disappear from your life completely. You will never see me again." He stood up, adjusting the collar of his cheap suit with a newfound, pathetic swagger. He walked to the door, stopping right with his hand on the brass handle to deliver his final crushing ultimatum. "I am giving you exactly 3 days to have your legal team draft the contracts," he sneered, looking over his shoulder. 3 days. If that paperwork is not sitting in front of me by Friday morning, I will not bother calling the press first. I will drive straight to Mateo's private school. I will walk right up to him in the middle of the playground, introduce myself as the father you hid from him, and I will make a massive, screaming scene. Imagine the severe psychological trauma that will cause your precious little boy. He walked out, slamming the heavy wooden door shut behind him. He thought he had successfully terrified me. He thought he had trapped a cornered animal. He had absolutely no idea that he had just willingly walked onto a landmine, and I was holding the detonator. Before the heavy oak door even fully clicked shut, my hands were trembling. I let out a long, ragged breath, making sure the security cameras caught my Oscar-worthy performance of a completely terrified, broken mother. I waited exactly 15 minutes to let his arrogance peak before I picked up my phone. I called the burner number he had left on my desk. I made sure to let my voice crack just enough, injecting a desperate, frantic tone into my words. I begged him not to go anywhere near Mateo's school. I told him I surrendered. I agreed to host a private, heavily secured mediation session on Friday morning with my legal counsel to officially process his demands. Julian chuckled over the phone, a sickening, wet sound of pure triumph, and hung up. Our private surveillance operatives began tracking his movements the second he left my building. They reported that Julian immediately drove straight to a high-end luxury exotic car dealership downtown. He spent hours sitting inside a bright red Italian sports car, running his hands over the steering wheel, and aggressively negotiating a lease he could not possibly afford yet. He was completely convinced he had just successfully extorted a tech billionaire. He was already spending the $50,000 a month and his 10% equity stake in his head, entirely drunk on his imaginary victory. While he was busy celebrating his own genius, my lawyer, Marcus, and I were standing in the freezing subterranean server room of Aegis Core Solutions. We were not resting. We were aggressively digging up his grave. I mobilized my absolute best digital forensics team. We initiated a massive, relentless cyber campaign to tear apart the buried wreckage of his failed Silicon Valley startup. We bypassed the public bankruptcy filings completely and sliced right into the encrypted ledgers and deleted server logs he thought were permanently destroyed. The plot twist we uncovered was more beautiful than I could have ever dreamed. His flashy cryptocurrency project had not failed simply because his young mistress stole the remaining funds or because the market crashed. His startup was a massive, highly illegal Ponzi scheme from day one. He had used his initial stolen capital to create a fake, inflated token. Using that illusion of success, he managed to trick a massive decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, composed of anonymous investors, into trusting his platform. He systematically siphoned millions of dollars from their liquidity pools, collapsed the project, and walked away, assuming that a faceless internet collective would never be able to organize a cohesive legal strike against him. He was somewhat correct about the DAO being paralyzed. Decentralized organizations often lack the legal teeth to pursue international warrants. However, Julian possessed absolutely zero foresight. He never bothered to check what happened to the massive debt he left behind. 3 years ago, when the broader crypto market took a severe downturn, that specific DAO panicked and liquidated its remaining assets, its entire portfolio of bad debt, stolen funds, and legal claims was quietly purchased in a bulk auction by an unnamed, highly aggressive corporate holding company. I stood behind my lead data analyst, watching the cascading lines of code on the massive monitor. We methodically traced every single stolen digital coin. We followed the money straight from the hacked DAO wallets, through a complex web of 3 different international cryptocurrency tumblers designed to hide the origin, and watched it drop directly into a private, offshore banking account in the Cayman Islands, an account tied directly to Julian's personal social security number and passport. It was the absolute, undeniable definition of massive federal wire fraud. I personally compiled the terabytes of irrefutable digital evidence. I transferred the banking records, the server logs, and the communication transcripts onto a sleek, heavy, military-grade encrypted hard drive. It fit perfectly into the palm of my hand. Cold and dense, the weight of it felt like pure, unadulterated justice. By Thursday evening, the preparations were completely finalized. The massive, glass-walled boardroom on the top floor was impeccably arranged for the morning mediation. At the exact center of the long mahogany table rested the thick, beautifully bound stack of legal contracts Julian had demanded. The papers clearly outlined his massive monthly salary and his precious corporate equity. It was exactly what he wanted to see. But resting right next to those papers, placed with deadly precision, was the encrypted hard drive. Everything was perfectly set in place. The cheese was sitting right on the spring, and the rat was practically breaking his own legs to get to the trap. Friday morning arrived exactly on schedule, bringing with it a tense, electric atmosphere that hummed through the top floor of the Aegis Core Solutions headquarters. I sat perfectly still at the head of the massive mahogany boardroom table, my hands neatly folded in front of me. Marcus sat to my right, his posture rigidly professional, a shark waiting patiently in the shallow water. Exactly at 9 o'clock, the heavy glass doors swung open. Julian strutted into the room like a conquering king returning to claim his spoils. He had brought along a sleazy, fast-talking attorney who wore entirely too much cheap cologne and carried a scuffed briefcase. They confidently took their seats directly across from us. Julian leaned back, crossing his arms with a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face, entirely convinced that he had successfully broken me. His attorney wasted absolutely no time. He aggressively unclasped his briefcase, pulled out a stack of documents, and began aggressively dictating their demands. He insisted that the immediate transfer of 10% of the corporate equity must be completed by the end of the business day. He demanded that the $50,000 a month consulting fee be established in an irrevocable direct deposit. He even had the sheer audacity to add a new clause, demanding a massive, upfront cash bonus to ensure Julian's total silence regarding Matteo and the media. Julian just sat there, nodding slowly, relishing every single second of his imagined power. When the sleazy lawyer finally stopped talking and slid a solid gold pen across the table for me to sign the surrender documents, the room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. I did not reach for the pen. I did not look at the contract. I simply turned my head and gave Marcus a nearly imperceptible nod. Marcus did not utter a single syllable. He calmly picked up the extortion contract, grasped it firmly with both hands, and ripped it perfectly down the middle. He tossed the shredded pieces of paper into the stainless steel trash can beside his chair, before Julian or his lawyer could even register their shock. Marcus reached into his leather satchel. He pulled out a massive, heavily bound dossier of printed financial records and slammed it down onto the center of the table with a deafening crack. Right on top of the files, he placed the heavy, military-grade encrypted hard drive. Julian jumped slightly in his chair, his smug grin violently faltering. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice suddenly sharp with a rising, nervous panic. "I thought we had a clear agreement." "We do not have an agreement, Julian," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and hollow as an empty vault. "We have a reckoning. While you were busy shopping for Italian sports cars you cannot afford, my digital forensics team was busy exhuming the rotting corpse of your Silicon Valley startup." I watched the exact moment the color completely drained from his face. His skin turned a sickening shade of pale gray. "I know everything," I continued, leaning forward slowly, locking my eyes entirely onto his terrified face. "I know your cryptocurrency project was a massive, illegal Ponzi scheme from the very first day. I know you systematically drained millions of dollars from that decentralized anonymous organization. And I know exactly how you used 3 different international crypto tumblers to hide the stolen funds before dropping them directly into a private, offshore account in the Cayman Islands under your own passport number." Julian opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. His lawyer suddenly stopped aggressively tapping his pen and stared at the thick dossier, a look of profound, creeping horror washing over his face. "But here is the absolute best part of the story. Julian," I whispered, delivering the final, killing blow. 3 years ago, when the market crashed, that anonymous organization liquidated its assets, all of its bad debt, including the millions of dollars you personally stole from them, was purchased in a bulk auction by an unnamed corporate holding company. That holding company belongs to the L&A Blind Trust. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, forcing him to feel the immense gravity of the trap closing around his neck. "Do you want to know who the sole, exclusive beneficiary of that massive wealth fund is? It is Matteo, the disabled son you called a useless burden, the child you abandoned to die." Julian physically recoiled, pressing his back hard against his chair as if the words had physically struck him. "You did not just steal from faceless investors," I stated, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "You committed massive federal wire fraud and international tax evasion against the financial estate of your own 9-year-old son. The hard drive sitting right in front of you contains terabytes of irrefutable, completely verified digital proof. Bank records, server logs, decrypted chat transcripts, everything." I stood up slowly, towering over him from across the table. I flipped the chessboard entirely. "Here is my counteroffer," I commanded, my tone completely merciless. "If you ever step foot within 50 miles of my son's school, if you ever utter his name to the press, or if you dare to file a single piece of paper in any family court in this country, Marcus will send this hard drive directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service in exactly 5 minutes. The evidence in this room is enough to lock you inside a federal penitentiary for 20 years. You will rot in a concrete cell, and I will personally make sure you never see the sun again." The sleazy attorney beside Julian had heard enough. He recognized immediately that his client was a walking legal nuclear bomb. He violently shoved his chair back, scrambled to stuff his legal pads into his cheap briefcase, and frantically backed away from the table. "I cannot represent you," the lawyer stammered, his voice cracking with pure fear. "I am officially dropping you as a client effective immediately. Do not ever contact my firm again." He turned around and practically sprinted out of the boardroom, the glass doors violently swinging shut behind him. Julian completely collapsed, the arrogant, extorting monster completely shattered into a million pathetic pieces. He slid out of his chair and fell directly onto his knees on the hard floor. He began weeping hysterically, large, ugly tears streaming down his face. his hands desperately reaching out toward me. He begged me for mercy. He pleaded with me not to destroy his life, completely forgetting how easily he had tried to destroy mine a decade ago. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, satisfying closure. I picked up my desk phone and pressed the security button. "We have a hostile trespasser in the executive boardroom. Send a team to escort him off the premises." Two massive, armed security guards entered the room moments later. They grabbed Julian by the arms, dragging his sobbing, pathetic body across the polished floor. They threw him out of the front doors of my building, tossing him directly onto the concrete pavement under the blistering, unforgiving Texas heat. He had absolutely nothing left. I had methodically stripped him of his money, his leverage, his hope, and every last shred of his dignity. That evening, the sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple as my private driver pulled through the heavily fortified, biometric security gates of my sprawling estate. The air was cool, quiet, and completely peaceful. I walked through the massive front doors of my home and found Mateo sitting comfortably on the large living room sofa. He looked up, his bright eyes shining with immense excitement. He immediately ran over and handed me his laptop, eager to show me a highly complex new piece of computer code he had successfully written that afternoon. I smiled, wrapping my arms tightly around his shoulders, pulling him into a deep, comforting hug. The war was officially over. My son was absolutely safe, fully protected inside the impenetrable empire his mother had built from the ashes of betrayal. Thank you so much for listening to Violet Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city or country in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this story of absolute justice and found it entertaining, please consider supporting our channel. As YouTube has demonetized us, we rely entirely on the kindness of our viewers to keep the lights on. A donation of just $1 helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue bringing you high-quality stories every single week. You can support us by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the secure donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you for your incredible support, and I will see you in the next story.